Hey guys, tonight we lean into the old ways of finding your way. When the world is wide, the roads are mostly rumors, and the only blue line showing you where to go is the river itself. You start in the hush before sunrise, listening to roosters test their alarms and to a far cartwheel grumble like an old storyteller. You probably won't survive this in the sense that by the time you've learned to read light like a shepherd and wind like a sailor, you'll be so relaxed you'll forget you were supposed to be nervous about getting lost at all. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening, drop a note with where you are and what time it is. I love watching our little constellation of night owls and early birds flicker across the map. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out and the horizon is a bruise turning gold, your breath a small ghost, and the world is already pointing, if you learn how to look. You lift your eyes because long before compasses make pockets heavy, you keep direction by light. East is where the sun is about to embarrass the horizon, west is the backstage door where it will slip away later. On a clear day, the arc of the sun is the day's longest sentence, and you read it like you're skipping to the good part. Shadows give you punctuation. Plant a straight stick in the soil, a traveler's gnomon, the world's cheapest gadget, and watch the tip of its shadow crawl. Mark it, wait, mark again. The line between those marks runs east-west, and a right angle to it gives you north-south. It's school geometry taught by a polite star. Your body remembers old cues. At noon the sun hangs highest and shadows shrink. Near the equator they all but vanish, while farther north or south they lean dramatically like gossips at a fence. You notice how the day's warmth arrives at the east wall first and leaves the west wall last, a silent clock set in stone. Mainstream fact. From Egypt to Greece to China, ancient surveyors used the gnomon to fix cardinal directions and to estimate latitude from a shadow's length, turning sun and stick into a measuring instrument long before GPS meant anything but good pastoral sense. The trick works anywhere the sky lowers its ladder. Cloud comes like a lampshade, but the sky still whispers. Find the brightest patch in the overcast, that's the sun hiding shyly. Sometimes a faint halo hints at its position. Quirky tidbit. Northern lore speaks of sunstones, crystals such as Iceland spar that can polarize skylight and reveal the sun's angle even when it's masked. It's the sort of cloudy day party trick that impresses exactly two people in a tavern and makes everyone else roll their eyes, yet sailors and storytellers kept the rumor alive. Historians still argue whether these stones were widespread practical tools or saga embellishments, retrofitted to clever minds. You carry the idea lightly, the way you carry a spare pin. Your nose joins the team. Directions don't live only in light. They also hide in scent. A tannery has a personality. You can detect a valley away. Your nose files a complaint and HR says take that up with the wind, while a bakery's warm exhale usually means you're bending toward a market street. In summer, hot dust smells different on a road that sees a lot of traffic. Wild thyme crushed to a green sigh. Horse and leather, iron shoes tapping out a metronome. In winter, smoke layers the air like blankets, and you learn which villages burn peat, which burn pine, which cling to vine clippings because that is what the hillside grows. Wind itself draws arrows. Prevailing winds tilt grass, comb reeds, and write on the skin of ponds. On some plains, the main wind makes a permanent part in the world's hair, and you read it like scripture. Keep one hand on the ground because soil tells tales. Finer dust means a road used often. Pebbles grow smooth where carts pass. Nettles invade margins where hooves have been scarce lately. Animal paths are nature's opinionated footnotes. Deer take the line of least resistance. Boars plot zigzags between food and cover, and you learn to borrow their instincts, knowing that water sits at the end of most creatures' sentences. By mid-morning you begin to befriend your shadow. It becomes your slow, dramatic sundial, stretching to tease your patience and shrinking when you finally find a rhythm. You note how it points west in the morning and east in the afternoon. You hold that flip in your head like a compass card. When the sky goes felt soft, let the other senses drive. Birds help, swallows skimming low hint at heavy air and damp. Seabirds pushing inland ahead of weather suggest a front. Corvids know towns and farms and sometimes behave like flying signposts, commuting the same black route as yesterday. A crossroads without a sign invites old folklore, but you treat it gently. You glance at trees and lichens and then you scold yourself for repeating the camp rumor that moss always grows on the north side. Moss grows where it's damp and shaded, which might be north or might be the side rain and wind caress most. So you recalibrate. Look for the tree lines windward lean, the bark roughened more on the weather side, the hedge that opens toward the field it has been trying to colonize for years. Historians still argue whether ordinary travelers relied much on botanical clues or mostly on gossip and memory. You use everything and pretend you planned it. By noon your stomach's clock, your tools are mostly habits. Drink a little, squint at the blinding page of the day and practice dead reckoning on land. Keep track of distance by time and pace, correct drift by fixing on a far tree and walking to it. Redraw your mental north every quarter hour. Mainstream fact: Roman itineraries and medieval direction lists measured distance by days walked or milestones counted, rather than by precise drawn maps. People traveled from one named place to the next like stepping stones, keeping count with feet, not rulers. Your feet, as usual, insist on a union break and then change their minds. Afternoon brings aroma as cartographer. Tar and pitch whisper of boatyards, vinegar from dyers and sharp smoke from forges announce craft streets long before their roofs appear. Monasteries perfume the air with rosemary and lavender, their herb gardens hugging sun-soft slopes. Fishermen's quarters hang a light shawl of brine and smoke. You promise to remember the smell of rain on dusty earth, the petrichor that turns a parched lane into a quiet choir, the world's way of saying left at the place that smells like a clean attic. Historians still argue whether travelers shared a common smell vocabulary for directions, but your nose writes its own dictionary with cheerful authority. As shadows lengthen, you stack clues like cairnstones. The wind says the coast is near, gulls confirm it. Even your tongue tastes iron and salt. Try the heel mark trick in the path. Press, release, watch the crumble. Fresh, sharp edges suggest few carts. Powdered edges mean the road is busy and worth following. Quirky tidbit: some pastoral guides recommended tasting a pinch of soil to tell chalk from clay from loam, a habit that sounds theatrical until your boots thank you for choosing the drier ridge over the gluey hollow. Your method is all natural, zero battery navigation, which is to say you're using the same firmware the planet ships with. Evening polishes the hedges with amber and the sun sinks into that burnished groove it has rubbed into the western rim of your world. You let the day's lessons settle. Light tells you which way to lean, shadow helps you prove it. Wind and smell keep you honest. You smile at your elegant technology. One stick, one nose, one sky. Truly bleeding edge gear. If you bottled it as an app, you'd call it the garlic positioning system, and watch it tell you to turn left at the stew. You'll add more tomorrow. Landmarks, blazed trees, sung directions that fold turns into verses you can hum with your tired feet. For now, the twilight pulls a blanket over the road, and you keep walking inside the compass you've built out of day. The road grows opinionated, and you start letting the world's big features make the choices. That hogback ridge to your right is a stubborn spine. Keep it at shoulder level, and the valley will pour you toward market, whether you like it or not. The tall beech that survived 3 storms wears a lightning scar like a sash. It becomes your lighthouse inland. Hilltops stitch a horizon you can follow like the top edge of a page, and a lone boulder the size of a cottage sits exactly where the glacier forgot it. People name it, they always do, and the name becomes a verb, boulder left. You repeat it under your breath, the way you repeated garlic positioning system yesterday, and grin at your own joke, because if you can't be your own comedian on a long walk, who will be? On uplands and in fog-hungry passes, people stack stones because stone remembers. A cairn is a sentence with many authors. Each traveller adds a word and the meaning stays legible for years. Mainstream fact: across the British Isles and Scandinavia, upland routes were marked for centuries by cairns at intervals, often renewed deliberately by shepherds and wayfarers, so a line of guidance survived heavy weather. In bright weather, they're reassurance. In low cloud, they're the difference between a safe descent and an embarrassing cameo as that dot on the wrong slope. You learn to trust the spacing, nearer on tricky ground, farther apart on gentle shoulders. You also learn to ignore the prank cairn, some joker built a few strides off the path. Every age has someone who thinks misdirection is a personality. Trees join the guild of guides. On forest tracks, travelers blaze trunks, small neat scars cut with an axe or later dabbed with paint, and you trail those pale commas through green paragraphs. First Nations and early colonists in North America sometimes trained saplings into marker trees, bending them low and staking them so the trunk set like a pointing arm toward water or a ford. Quirky tidbit: you will start talking to these trees. Thanks, friend. Good angle on the creek. And that's fine. It's either harmless affection or an advanced navigation interface. Historians still argue whether many surviving bent trees are genuine trail markers or natural oddities later romanticized. You keep the debate in your pocket and the direction in your head. Villages, too, curate memory into stone. Boundary stones sit half-swallowed by turf, initials worn vague, and once a year people walk the edges of their world to remember them with their bodies. The English call it beating the bounds. The parish makes a processional loop, singing, praying, stopping at each marker to tap it with rods, and in some places bumping a child lightly against a stone so the landmark prints on a brain that has decades left to remember. Mainstream fact: parish perambulations were common in medieval and early modern England, renewing communal knowledge of limits before precise maps and deeds settled arguments. You, mercifully, do not volunteer your head as a mnemonic device. You just hum the tune and note how a song makes a boundary easier to keep. Songs do more than guard borders. They carry directions. Story roads are playlists you inherit, each verse a turn. You mouth one now, handed down by a carter who swore by it. Past Boar's Tusk Hill, keep right of the ash where water laughs twice, cross stones in a sash, count 7 planks, then field of rye, greet St. Bridget, follow the sky. It sounds cute until you try it and find that the ash does stand just after the knuckled spur. The stream splits into 2 chattery steps. The footbridge has 7 planks. You check like a child, yes, 7. And a tiny wayside carving of a saint smiles at you like an old aunt who knows you snuck a second bun. Mainstream fact: Aboriginal Australian songlines encode vast route networks as music and story, matching verses to landmarks so travelers can navigate across country by singing landscape into sequence. Historians still argue whether outsiders fully grasp how precise and how sacred those mnemonics are. You honor the principle and keep your humming respectful. Elsewhere, epics and local lore double as mental atlases. Irish dinshenters place lore poems, bind stories to hills and wells. Norse sagas drop fjords and capes into their action as if everyone has the same map in their heads. Itinerant merchants pass on rhymed reckoners no less eagerly than prices. You watch how tales stick to features, turning a fork into a scene of some long-ago quarrel, a clapper bridge into the site of a saint's polite miracle, a quarry into a giant's nap. That giant appears in 4 separate communities, which is impressive brand expansion. You're not lost, you're just buffering until the next verse loads. Signboards help when trees and stones fall silent. In towns, a painted boar or mermaid or boot hangs above a doorway, creaking helpful advice. This is an inn, that's a cobbler, and by extension, the road you want is the one with more boots and fewer mermaids. Before standardized street numbers, unique signs made directions conversational, left at the Green Dragon, right at the 3 Tons. Historians still argue whether the literacy rates made pictures essential, or whether signs were theatrical punctuation in streets already navigated by smell and routine. Either way, you adopt the method at once, right at the goose that hates everyone. You know the one. She hisses like a kettle and polices the alley. Good landmark, terrible concierge. Some landmarks are deliberately holy. Wayside crosses stand at junctions on the continent. Roadside shrines hold candles and petitions. In Japan, little Jizo statues appear like patient punctuation along pilgrim roads. You tuck that detail away for a later stretch. Even secular markers feel devotional. A milestone, a public fountain, a market cross. Each says, humans were here, choosing and remembering. You let your shoulder brush a low wall polished by centuries of cloaks, and the stone murmurs the same sentence back. Naming helps as much as building. People name bends after mischief. Dead man's turn, bride's leap, the thief's hedge, so you never forget where that ditch gets greedy. They name trees after animals they resemble. Foxtail oak, then left, and rocks after saints they obviously do not resemble. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, the butter cross where dairy was sold doubled as a bulletin board for routes, a 3D message pinned to a town's memory. You catch yourself inventing mnemonics. The oak that looks like a disappointed aunt means keep the ridge. The hayrick with the jaunty lean means quit daydreaming and check the sky. Not all stories agree, and that's useful. When one carter says after the sunken lane, and another swears before the sunken lane, you know to slow down and look for the lane twice. Historians still argue whether there existed widespread vernacular route poems in medieval Europe beyond pilgrim instructions, or whether directions stayed hyper-local, passed mouth to mouth like recipes that never made it into books. You suspect the answer is both. Big paths had choruses everyone knew. Side paths had verses only locals could sing without tripping. By late afternoon, the playlist in your head hums on autopilot. Boulder left, ash right, 7 planks, greet St. Bridget. You add a verse of your own. Where the gander shouts taxes, ignore him, and decide that humor is a perfectly valid cartographic layer. 3 light jokes ago you promised yourself tea. 2 jokes ago you promised not to count jokes like milestones. 1 joke ago you promised to stop promising things to yourself out loud. The rhythm of named things becomes a spell that keeps you moving even when your feet apply for immediate retirement. Twilight paints everything the color of memory, and that's when story roads shine brightest. A landmark you missed at noon announces itself with a long shadow. The cairn, modest in daylight, stands up and claps gently. A signboard lamp blinks on and makes the hog's tusk gleam like a friendly moon. The chorus returns. Boar sign, ash tree, 7 planks, and you feel the road settling under you like a familiar bed. Tomorrow you'll join larger currents, pilgrim tracks, post roads, stones that count the miles, but tonight you walk the old duet between thing and name, feature and tale, leaving a few quiet words in the cairn for the next pair of ears. If they listen hard enough, they might even hear your chuckle tucked under the top stone, pointing the way like a whisper with a grin. Morning comes with the sound of many feet, and you let yourself be braided into something bigger than your lone muttering self. Paths that once felt private begin to flow like rivers towards shrines, courts, fairs, and capitals. The road has timetables now. Bells from a priory pull you forward, market trumpets shove you along. Behind you a cart creaks threats in the universal language of move or meat potatoes, intimately. You hitch your pace to the pilgrim current, bundles, staffs, scallop shells flashing like small moons on cloaks, and find that belonging to a crowd is a kind of compass. The day's directions simplify to a chorus. Keep the church spire in front of you, keep the gossip close, and if the gossip is good, buy bread where it lives. Pilgrims have a way of turning the landscape into a checklist. Wayside crosses nail junctions into place, chapels squat pleasantly by bridges, their caretakers tending lamps and rumours. Mainstream fact, along Europe's great routes like the roads to Santiago or Rome, monasteries and hospitals offered beds and bread, while wayside markers and shrine networks gave ordinary walkers a reliable scaffolding long before standardized signposts. You learn to trust the scallop shell badge. It means both "I'm going that way" and people ahead can tell you if you're off by a village. Quirky tidbit, the shell isn't only a badge, it's also a makeshift cup for thin wine, or a spoon for soup, which explains the oddly contented slurping you hear from every third cloak at dusk. Historians still argue whether those badges worked more as practical passports, earning charity and safety, or as souvenirs proving you did the hard miles. You pin yours on and let it multitask. Crossing a bridge, you notice a little door in the stone, a hermit's cell or a tiny chapel tucked into the span, a reminder that bridges have custodians both practical and spiritual. Some keepers ring bells in fog, and for a coin they'll tell you whether the left bank inn is the one where the bread is fresh and the bedbugs are on sabbatical. In your head the cairn from yesterday meets this bridge with a nod, both are sentences written by many hands. You also hear your earlier playlist, boulder left, 7 planks, slip another verse into place, and over St. Mildred's Bridge, keep the spire like a silver nail straight ahead. Not all stones preach, some count. You begin seeing them by noon, squat, shouldered pillars half swallowed by turf, numbers shaved down by weather. Milestones are the road's abacus. Mainstream fact, the Roman world laced its empire with roads punctuated by milestones that recorded distances and often the names of emperors responsible for maintenance, while a relay system of posting stations, the cursus publicus, moved messages and travellers at a regulated clip between mansioners and horse-changing mutations. You can almost hear the bookkeeper's quill scratching in the background each time your boot passes one of those stones. Historians still argue whether many stretches stayed Roman smooth into the Middle Ages, or whether tradition overstates how much later travellers enjoyed those old engineering feats. Your ankles, walking a suspiciously well-drained causeway, vote for the engineers today, and reserve the right to change parties on the next bog. You learn how to ride the postal tide without ever touching a letter. If you keep to roads that see couriers, you find information, the original network coverage. In market towns, post horns blow a jaunty sentence, and inn-yards act like living message boards. You listen for phrases like turnpike ahead, cart stuck at the ford, herd in the lane, danger points tumbling out of ale cups. It's TripAdvisor, except the reviews are shouted, the stars are actual stars, and someone inevitably recommends my cousin's place, best stew on earth, which surprisingly often turns out to be true. When the plain gives way to hills, you begin to appreciate the old intentionality of medieval causeways, those raised, stone-ribbed paths that keep feet and wheels above mud scheming habits. A line of these causeways runs toward a priory, where the bell keeps time, the kitchen keeps hope, and the guestmaster keeps the kind of ledger that remembers who treats straw mattresses like royalty. You learn the sacred geometry of spires. Tall ones mean wealth, and thus a dense web of roads. Twin towers often mean a cathedral city, and therefore the great crossroads where you can re-aim your life with a polite prayer and a hot drink. Quirky tidbit, some bridge towns supported professional waymen, or toll officials, whose day job, beyond counting pennies, was pointing travellers at the right fork before tempers and axles snapped. Their unofficial title in your head is persuaders, and you start to wish every crossroads came with one and a warm bun. By afternoon the road remembers you are not the only culture inventing ways to keep people moving. Across arid stretches east and south, caravanserai appear like punctuation on a long sentence, courtyards with thick walls, wells and rooms where traders can sleep with their camels close enough to exchange opinions. Mainstream fact, from Persia across Central Asia, way stations supported caravans through deserts, while under the Mongol Empire, a mounted relay known as the Yam crisscrossed the steppe with regular stations, fresh horses and official paisa tablets, authorizing swift travel. You don't carry a paisa, but you do carry the trick of pacing between beacons, count so many slow breaths to the next watchtower, drink, repeat. Historians still argue whether the yam's efficiency has been romanticized by later writers or whether its speed truly knit far-flung provinces into a single administrative heartbeat. Your feet, who are deeply biased in favor of fresh horses, choose romance. Even farther afield, you meet different versions of the same human solution. In imperial China, measured li posts and official post stations Yuzan organized distance and speed. In Tokugawa, Japan, the Shukuba post towns studding the Tokaido and Nakasendo kept the road tidy with quotas and rules, while distance mounds Ichirizuka bracketed the way like friendly shoulders you could lean against for a moment. Mainstream fact: the Tokugawa government standardized those distance markers along major highways in the 17th century, turning measurement itself into a public service. You touch one of these ideas with your mind, and it feels smooth from many hands, like the wall you brushed under the town gate this morning. Back in the cathedral-shadowed West, the habit of counting hardens into policy. Turnpike trusts in the 17th and 18th centuries plant milestones methodically, and eventually fingerposts that literally point. Coaching inns run on timetables, so predictable even your shadow could plan a lunch break. You're still pre-reliable map in the sense that you don't carry a neat, affordable surveyed sheet in your pocket, but your world hums with numbers and intervals. You measure your day not only by smell and sky, not only by boulders and songs, but by stone arithmetic. 4 miles to the next hamlet, 10 to the county town, 1 friendly spire away from admitting your socks deserve a medal. Of course, systems stutter. A milestone lies toppled, a cairn is rearranged by a bored goat, a bridge keeper has gone to market. When that happens, you return to the traveling algorithm you've been compiling since yesterday. Ask a woman sweeping a doorstep, she knows which fork gets you there dry. Bribe your future self with stew if you stay patient, and keep the longest line of straight road you can see until some human or stone contradicts you persuasively. Historians still argue whether ordinary medievals navigated mainly by formal networks or mostly by social ones, hospitals and posts versus gossip and habit. Your experience says the answer again is braided. Stones and stories, bells and buns, milestones and murmurs. Evening slides in and the post road becomes a pleasant stage. A rider clatters through, horn bright. A wagoner swears poetically at a rut. A child points at your scallop shell and shyly asks where the ocean starts. You point toward tomorrow's edge and promise yourself you'll follow water and stars soon, because coasts and constellations are their own high-clarity signage, and you've always wanted to let the Milky Way be your trail of spilled salt. For now you tuck yourself into the current. Pilgrims murmuring prayers that double as directions, innkeepers rehearsing the day's news into usable lines, milestones counting down like a lullaby. Remember the garlic positioning system and the 7 plank. Add 3 more stones to the buttercross to the same gentle joke. You're not lost, you're participating in an old choreography where every footfall is a yes. You keep the land on your left hand and the breath of the sea on your right, letting the coast tutor you in a different grammar. Pilotage is what the old hands call it. Running by eye along headlands, bays and beacons, and it feels like walking a sentence where commas are coves and full stops are capes. Day marks rise like exclamation points. A painted tower here, a whitewashed pyramid there, a church steeple that doubles as a divine arrow. At night fires wink on high points, and the tide hisses the footnotes. You taste salt on your lips and tar in the wind, and you keep a lace of foam just off your bow like the hem of a skirt you respectfully don't step on. Where rivers meet the sea, the world leaves you breadcrumbs. Discoloured bands show where fresh water shoves it into brine. Floating twigs and blossom tell you which branch has the town you want. In fog the coast keeps whispering. The boom of surf on a cliff is a bass drum. The thin seethe of shingle is a brush on snare. 2 towers in line, one behind the other, become a range. When they sit precisely one atop the other, you know you're in the fairway, and you hold that alignment like a string stretched between your fingers. You're still the same person who counted 7 planks on the footbridge and joked about the garlic positioning system. The difference now is that your jokes smell like kelp. When signs blur, you reach for the oldest instrument you can swing without looking theatrical. A lead line, knotted at intervals with a plug of tallow in its hollow base. You swing, cast, feel the line kiss bottom, then call out depth to yourself and anyone listening, even if anyone is just the gull that thinks it runs the harbour. Mainstream fact: for millennia mariners took soundings this way, and the tallow picked up a pinch of the seabed shell, sand, ooze, so pilots could recognize a channel by touch and word, reciting by the Mark 5 by the Deep 6 as if announcing guests at a dance. The vocabulary keeps you safe and pleasantly theatrical, and you're not above bowing to the ooze when it saves you from embarrassment. Birds become your itineraries with wings. Terns and noddies commute with purpose. In the hours around dawn and dusk, their flight lines sketch arrows toward roosts on land, a feathered bus map you can ride with your eyes. Quirky tidbit: one saga remembers a navigator releasing ravens at sea. When a bird refused to settle on the ship and flew straight in one direction, they followed and found land. Low tech, high drama, and frankly the kind of ask-a-local strategy you've trusted since the Buttercross. You aren't above copying a raven if one presents a resume. Wind and water carry longer conversations than birds. Past the chop, beyond the froth that noses beaches, lie swells. Long, patient muscles marching from far storms. You learn to read them. A primary swell rolls from the storm track. A secondary swell reflects off islands and reefs. Between them runs a subtle corridor where the wave shapes stitch into a line you can feel with your bones. In some archipelagos that corridor behaves like a road, an invisible dilep that navigators sense with skin and seat. Sailors talk about it in a tone normally reserved for church. Historians still argue whether everyone truly felt it in motion, or whether the teaching mostly lived ashore in metaphors and training charts. But your balance learns a new alphabet and stops asking permission from your eyes. Night unclutters the horizon and replaces it with a lattice. You already know the sun's tattletales. Now the stars introduce themselves one by one, taking their places like an orchestra tuning. Polaris hangs where North lives, hardly moving, and you treat it like the reliable friend who holds your coat and never leaves the party. Measure how high it perches above the sea's rim, and you carry a rough sense of your latitude in your head. Watch the Big Dipper swing around it, and you keep your bearings when the shore hides. To the south, if you've crossed that equatorial seam, the Southern Cross tilts its kite, and a line drawn along its long axis drops near south. Its companion pointers confirm the trick. You memorize the rising points of bright stars along the horizon, your star paths, and steer by them the way on land you steered by the ash tree and the 7 planks. Clouds sometimes pull a curtain, but you don't despair. The swell still speaks, the wind still keeps its lane. Even the dark has color, the black-green that hints at depth, the leaden smear that betrays a sandbar waiting to collect prophecies and keels. You count time with a sandglass that sighs every half hour, and you log your heading and speed, adding up distance the way you once added up milestones. You dead reckon, dead not because it's grim, but because it's deduced, a quiet arithmetic that keeps a ghost ship of your position sailing through your thoughts. If your arithmetic and the sea's story disagree, the sea wins. It is older, and carries better reference letters. Coastal pilots carry the landscape in phrases as tidy as the verses you hummed yesterday. Bring the church spire on the left of the notch. When the mill's vanes hide behind the tower, turn in. You grin at how human all navigation is. Lighthouses and saints, mills and smell, and how even at sea you collect landmarks the way you collected cairns. Historians still argue whether certain implements were practical tools of ocean passage or later romantic gloss, and the favorite example bobbing in debates is a small disc found in Greenland, a cracked wooden round some interpret as a sun compass for finding direction when shadows shrink, others as a fragment of something decorative. You keep the argument gentle in your head and the bearing firm in your hand. Out where land is a memory, you borrow whole cosmologies. You recite star names like a lullaby. You track Venus's bright swagger at dawn and use Orion's belt as a ruler across the sky's black linen. The Milky Way runs like salt spilled by a giant cook and can serve as your long, soft highway, an after-hours version of the post road. On certain nights, bioluminescent plankton spark in your wake, and the sea writes electric cursive around the hull. You consider claiming it as a custom nightlight for the Garlic positioning system, and wisely keep that joke to yourself in case the ocean hears and takes offense. Cloud breaks return you to earthly signs. The smell of land arrives before the line of coast. Wet leaf, soil, a shadow of smoke, the inland version of petrichor, wearing a sea cloak. Clouds stack differently over islands, their bellies lit by lagoon shallows at sunrise, a thin greenish bloom, sometimes halos, the place where reef and sand brighten the water below. You don't trust it alone, any more than you'd trust the goose that shouted taxes by the roadside, but layered with birds and swell, and a new tone of surf, it nudges you like a friend steering you by the elbow toward the correct door. In harbours, the choreography tightens. Buoys bob with painted meanings. A quay bell marks the hour. The tide says now or wait. You take soundings again, because humility is buoyant. You line up your ranges because pride is heavy. Memory folds around the familiar. The scallop shell you pinned on inland Pilgrims flashes back in your mind when you see a pilgrim ship's badge carved over a wharf. The buttercross you used as bulletin board now becomes a quay post layered with notices, oaths and love letters to fish. The world's methods rhyme even when the pages of the book change. You abide by one rule that refuses to get old: stack cues. A single clue is a rumor, two a gossip, three is a plan. Depth plus birds plus a stain of fresh water, estuary. Swell from the north plus a faint pumice raft plus a cloud pile with a white underglow. Volcanic island, downwind, probably boasting opinions. Your brain becomes the sketch map your pocket can't hold yet, and you realize you've been drawing it since you squinted at the morning sun and planted your stick in the dust. By the time the tide turns, you're ready to borrow one more trick and then head back inland. Listen to the river inside the sea. Tidal streams run like invisible roads. Slack water is the quiet square where all traffic hesitates and nods. Overfalls are the angry roundabouts everyone pretends to like. You tuck that pattern into the same drawer where you keep the 7 planks and the cairn's top stone and the buttercross's soft shade. Tomorrow you'll braid everything: compass needles you finally trust, neat itineraries of turns and times, sketch maps drawn on scraps, and the first survey lines laid straight as a monk's rule into one practiced brain map that will walk you right to the threshold of reliable maps. For now you lower the sail, feel the swell ease, and let the stars fold themselves into neat, quiet squares you can stack in your chest like calm. You step off the quay with a head full of ranges and ravens, and slip into a century where people begin to bottle the world in lines. The trick, you find, is not to abandon your ash tree and 7 planks and buttercross, but to braid them with new toys, needles that know north, lists that time your turns, sketches that make a corner of paper behave like a bend in the road, and surveyor's instruments that bully straightness out of the landscape like monks with very tidy souls. Your brain map doesn't retire, it hires help. The first hire is a sliver of steel that wants to point. You learn to magnetize a sewing needle by rubbing it with lodestone, then float it on a splash of water in a sliver of reed or a cork ring. The reed turns, hesitates, and then settles like a pointer dog that has finally remembered what it was bred for. Mainstream fact: the magnetic compass shows up in China by antiquity, in navigation by the Song era, and reaches the Mediterranean world by the 12th-13th centuries, making night sailing and cloudy day steering less theatrical and more repeatable. Quirky tidbit: some pocket compasses ride in walnut shells, half a walnut, a puddle, a needle, compact enough to sit with your coins. Others hide in a little horn box that doubles as a salt cellar if dinner runs long. Historians still argue whether overland travellers adopted compasses quickly, or whether they remained mostly a mariner's pet for generations. You use it sparingly ashore, as a referee when trees and wind disagree. Next you make friends with lists that think in turns instead of pictures. Sailors call them rutters. Romans earlier had itineraria. Merchants keep their own mumbling versions on wax tablets that smell delightfully of bees. From St. Bridget's Bridge, go west by south for 1 hour. When the goose that shouts taxes is behind you and the ridge lies like a sleeping ox, bear left to the bore sign, cross 7 planks. The poetry looks suspiciously like your old playlist, but now each verse comes with a bearing and a time. Mainstream fact: medieval and early modern pilots compiled rutters with courses and distances between named points, a textual navigation that could be copied and traded. On land, itineraries like the Antonine list numbered stations and miles, turning geography into an arithmetic a determined walker could count. Historians still argue whether early Portolan charts, the shockingly accurate coastal maps that bloom in the 13th century, grew out of this rutter habit, or from a lost geometric master. Your vote is rutter first, neat sheet later, and a lot of messy margins in between. Neat sheets arrive all the same. You see your first true Portolan on a tavern table and feel your shoulders drop. The coasts you've been steering by, the toothy bays, the capes like knuckles are there, crisp as if the parchment had sailed with you. Radiating from compass roses, straight lines, the rums, crisscross the sea like cat's cradle strings, you can follow with a ruler. You lay your little hornbox compass on the rose and feel very modern for someone whose purse contains a crumbly oatcake and a saint's badge. The land inland is still rumour on these sea charts, but rumour has begun to clear its throat. On land you discover a style of drawing that doesn't pretend to be the whole world, just your slice. Estate stewards sketch fields with hedges like stitches, mills that look like fat toys, boundary stones labelled with initials you beat with sticks once a year. Village maps grow as arguments require them, as marriages braid 2 strips of earth, as a stream decides it would prefer a new bed, and everyone negotiates the nightmare politely. You draw your own sand maps in innyards, using spilled ale as rivers and breadcrumbs as cairns, then transcribe them to paper with a stub of charcoal. Quirky tidbit: some folk carry a slate in a wooden frame with a lid. A traveller's sketchbook before sketchbook is a word. Rub with spit, redraw, repeat, the world wiped clean with a sleeve. Surveyors arrive like magicians with boxes and rods. One plants a groma, crossed arms on a pole, plumb lines dangling, and forces right angles where the land prefers gossip. Another levels with a corrobates, a big wooden contraption with a water trough that scolds slopes into confessing their tilt. You pace with a cord knot to knot, learning your personal chain length. You count under your breath as if reciting a prayer to Saint Accuracy. Mainstream fact: Roman land division centuriation imposed grids with the groma. Later, early modern surveyors used chains and plane tables with elidades to sketch directly from site to sheet, and by the 17th century triangulation measuring one baseline, then sighting angles could stretch precision over counties. Historians still argue whether the Great Triangulation Revolution belongs to this moment or to a slightly later, more mathematically caffeinated age. You pay attention not to the calendar but to the feeling. The land is beginning to behave measurably. In your hands everything you've learnt becomes a braid. The compass keeps you honest when fog steals the sun. The rudder tells you west by south for 1 hour to the Buttercross, and you check the hourglass, like a serious person who nevertheless just said Buttercross with a fond smile. The sketch catches the awkward bend after the bore sign that words always fail to pin. The surveyor's cord makes you suspicious when your feet swear a mile was shorter yesterday. Memory stitches the rest. St. Bridget's smile, the cairn's top stone warm from a dozen hands, the wind's combing of the reed bed, the dilep you felt in your knees out at sea that one miraculous dawn. When news grows ambitious, you learn to read maps that mean the whole country, not just the parish. They are not yet cheap, they are not yet widely trusted, but they look like tomorrow. Rivers run with the cool authority of ink. Mountains sprout like polite dragon spines. Towns sit inside circles as if waiting to be called to supper. You notice what maps omit, bogs you can smell and mud that ate a wheel last spring, and you write small corrections in the margins with a satisfaction that would get you in trouble if the map had a temper. You keep your rudder anyway, you keep the jokes anyway. Garlic positioning system stays installed, it just got a glamorous interface. Sailors, never content to sit quietly, add altitude to the kit. You meet a backstaff that lets a navigator measure the sun's height without going blind, and a mariner's astrolabe that looks like a bronze biscuit but bites latitude out of the sky. You borrow the trick for land, hold a staff at arm's length, count fingers between hilltop and sun, pretend you meant to do that, and decide when to stop early so you reach St. Bridget's Bridge while there's still enough light to check whether the 7 planks are still 7. Mainstream fact: by the 16th century, tools like the crossstaff, backstaff and astrolabe allowed latitude finding at sea. On land, simple surveying staffs and the emerging plane table turned looking into drawing with unusual speed. Historians still argue whether ordinary travelers ever touched these gadgets or whether they belong to pilots and professionals. You magpie collector of other people's useful habits are happy to steal whatever pieces suit your feet. You also learn what cannot be measured conveniently: generosity at a crossroads, the reliability of a baker's directions, the tone a bell carries on dry air versus damp. You still ask the woman with the broom. You still taste dust if a ridge looks deceptive, chalk crisp, clay grip. You still let birds write sentences across the sky. But now if the goose that yells taxes dies or retires to a quieter lane, as geese eventually must, you have bearings, times, chords and sketches to keep your humour from walking off a cliff. Every so often the kit betrays you. The compass sulks near an iron vein. The hourglass sticks because somebody greased the cork. Your sketch looks like a potato with opinions. You laugh and reach for redundancy. Stack cues, pointer plus sun plus smell of dyers upwind. Range towers plus tallow, trace plus depth count, cairn plus child's rhyme plus fingerpost. What you're really doing is training a kind of inner survey, triangulating between tools, tails and textures, until the world collapses into a single useful arrow pointing through the fog. A last problem remains: sharing what you know without being there to hum the tune. That is where the new age is headed. Pilgrim badges become printed guidebooks, rutters become wagoners with little coastal views, estate plans fatten into county atlases, triangulation nets march over kingdoms like invisible spiderwebs that catch error and pin it until it stops wriggling. When reliable maps finally tuck themselves into travelers' pockets and hang in schoolrooms, you do not feel obsolete, you feel recognized. The map is your old brain, cleaned up for company. You tuck your horn compass away, fold your grubby sketch, smooth the page of a printed sheet with a reverent palm, and glance once more at the sky you learnt from on the first morning. The sun still climbs, shadows still write, wind still leans grass, birds still commute, saints still mine bridges, stones still count. The map age arrives not with a deletion but with an invitation. Bring everything, the paper says. So you do. Let it all loosen now. Unlace the day the way you unlace your boots, slow and unhurried, letting the knots remember how to be just strings again. The needle settles, the hourglass goes quiet, and even the gull with the big opinions folds itself down like a letter you've finished reading and don't need to answer tonight. You let the ash tree and the 7 planks drift to the back of your mind, not gone, just softened like landmarks seen through warm rain on a summer window. Breathing lengthens into something tide-like out, in a hush between, and every tool you've carried takes a gentle step back to make room for rest. The compass becomes a small moon in a walnut shell. The rutter's instructions melt into a slow lullaby of familiar names. The cairn's top stone sits warm in your palm for one last moment, and then returns to its place, and you feel the tiny satisfaction of leaving a thing better aligned than you found it. The buttercross keeps its cool shade for tomorrow. The goose who yelled taxes is definitely off duty. The church spire keeps watch for everyone, not just you. Above you, the stars that once made lattices now blur into a soft, harmless milk, and the Milky Way is nothing more urgent than a bright smear where your thoughts can drift like sleepy boats tied safely to a quay. You lie down inside your brain map and discover it is also a bed. The roads are seams in a quilt, the rivers are gentle, cool fingers smoothing the fabric, and the hills rise only as much as a breath. If a bell rings, it's only for vespers in some far kind town. If a wind moves, it is the sort of wind that carries lavender and bread. Wherever you began, village lane, harbour wall, high moor, the way forward can wait. Tonight, the only direction is down into rest. Good, let go.